Hello and welcome to the first part of our episodic coverage of E3. Now, as we record this, E3 is done and dusted. It is in the books as we record it. So we have had a chance to consider everything, look back, and figure out what our highlights and what our lowlights were for the event. The main thing that we've come up with is breaking it down into three prongs, and this will hopefully give you an idea of the event itself. Nintendo, Microsoft, the rest. And that is basically how E3 sits at the moment. But I don't want to do it by myself. I'm going to introduce Donald now. Mr. Donald, thank you for joining me to discuss E3. It's tough. It's tough to say that it was a bad year for E3 because it's been a bad 18 months for the industry. Yeah. And when I say bad 18 months, it's been a bad 18 months for anything new coming out, which is what E3 deals in. As far as people spending money on games, it has definitely not been a bad 18 months for video games.
No, yeah, like we've gotten to the point where like the games that were going to come out last year came out last year. Now we're getting to the point where developers are really starting to feel the sort of the pinch of working from home and not being able to collaborate in their physical offices. So they haven't had the chance to really go hard on their upcoming games, and we're starting to see the effect of this. Not to mention the perpetual existential cloud that E3 has been under.
And this was before COVID. Like before COVID, it had had enough controversies and enough issues that it was going to be a problem. You mentioned developers struggling with COVID. Let's start about Nintendo, because they are probably the developer that stands out to me that seems to be struggling the most with COVID. Everyone else is at least trying to pretend that it's business as usual. Nintendo are the ones who put on that stiff upper lip and just pretended otherwise.
Which is very much on brand for them, isn't it? But despite that, one could argue that they kind of had one of the better showings of E3, like mainly because it's just, that is kind of the advantage that Nintendo has at E3 of like they've got a few cards they can always play, which would get people hyped, such as WarioWare Get It Together.
Yes, WarioWare Get It Together is the two-player WarioWare game coming to the Switch. Very excited. Last WarioWare game we had was Wario Game & Watch, or whatever it was called on Wii U.
Yeah, but we also had the 3DS version, which was kind of the greatest hits of the WarioWare.
And that was fine. Like that was very like traditional one. This one, obviously, it'll have a little bit of that kind of craziness that the GameCube version had and that kind of stuff. So it looks great. I'm really super keen for it. That was all they had to show, and I was on board for Nintendo at E3.
I'm curious about how they'll handle like having your avatar on screen the entire time, and like how that'll go into the micro games. But like I am a very simple man when it comes to WarioWare. Give me a new one and I'll take it. Thank you very much.
The next thing we want is Frobisher Says, and we're not getting one of those.
No.
The other one that's worth mentioning is Metroid Dread. It fits its name, very bleak, very barren for a Metroid game. It's obviously going for, it ties into the universe via, I think, Metroid Prime. I want to say they mentioned the Dread project that long ago.
No, yeah, like it was in an Easter egg in Metroid Prime 3.
Yes.
But this isn't a first-person shooter. This is going back to the side-scrolling, what you think of as a Metro game, except they've added now like a perpetual threat of these indestructible robots occasionally hassling you in these areas, which seems like it'll add really interesting twists to otherwise just the exploring around that this game
X's going to give it to you. It just strikes me as something they picked up from Resident Evil 2. You know what I mean? Like the remake of Resident Evil 2. Look, I'm a Metroid mark for the old school ones. I've never been a big fan of Prime. I know that's blasphemy in some circles, but sign me up for this. And the one thing that I'll say about Nintendo stuff is it's all coming out pretty soon. Like I knew for a while that they had nothing, but then they've suddenly just come out carte blanche with a lot of stuff.
So WarioWare is coming out, I believe, July or August.
No, September.
September. Metroid Dread is coming out in around October.
Yep.
And then we've also got coming soon as well, Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp, which is like one of the other games that got my Twitter feed a buzz when it was unveiled.
Was it majority good or majority bad? Because the one thing with Advance Wars was always that great art style that had that great 16-bit unique kind of art style. I'm not particularly sold on the artistic direction of the new one, it must be said.
No, it does look kind of mobile game-ish, but I think people are just so enamored with Advance Wars and the memories of that they're just happy, as long as the rest of the game is there in terms of
Yeah.
like the mechanics, the story, then people will be happy.
What was that game recently came out? It's not Warframe. It's War something, and like it's a similar, real.
No, yeah,
similar
like
kind
there
of-
was a game. It was what last year. That was very similar. War X, like, War something.
Yeah. Obviously, yeah. And that was very Advanced Wars, but medieval instead. So that scratched a lot of those itches until this
Yeah.
came out. We saw a little bit more of the sequel for Breath of the Wild as well, which is obviously one of the big ones that they've been holding on to for.
Note that it is the sequel to Breath of the Wild and not Breath of the Wild 2: something, which they said will give up a key part of that game, which people have gone wild with. Oh, you get to play as Ganondorf in this one. Oh, this takes place in the Skyrim universe or something or some such.
Bod Boward shows up.
Yeah, but
no-
like it does seem like it's expanding by taking things to the sky, and like there seems to be a lot more verticality that will come into play.
I feel like, look, I mean, I've been a big detractor of Breath of the Wild for a while. Like, its emergent gameplay style, it was great. Sad Girl Zelda was great, but I feel there was a lot of wasted opportunities. If this sequel follows what they've kind of said it will follow, I feel like it will be exactly what I want, a Hearts and Minds tour of Hyrule after the events of Breath of the Wild, and that, to me, is a fantastic way to go with it. And trying to rebuild that civilization is going to be far more interesting than anything else they could have potentially done.
Yeah,
I
like,
hope
sure,
you don't
yeah.
get Metroided on your powers is the only thing I would say.
Yeah, like sure, you say all that, but really, I think the question everyone wants to know is, do your weapons destroy themselves or not?
Yeah, that was the single worst part of Breath of the Wild 1. Another interesting crossover game, because the first game did better than I think anyone expected. Mario vs. Rabbids, what is it, Sparks of Hope is the tagline for that one.
Yeah.
The first game was great. This one's got a little bit more Valkyria Chronicles with like the circle of influence, almost what's that one that I love? And I can't think. Vagrant's Heart, Vagrant Story. They've gone a little bit that way with it. I don't know. I'm keen for part 2. I love part 1. It'll be interesting to see what they change about part 2 to make it like to continue. They've
Like
gone
I
into
imagine
space.
like they won't progress it too much, as in like the focus will be on like pushing forward any narrative in the universe, or like as in, especially with the trailers, like emphasizing like you have these Luma rabbit hybrids and
Yes.
the rabbit what's her
Rosalina.
name? Rosalina, yeah.
And they've obviously got their own UIC characters and stuff like that as well, who come out through the thing. First one was good. I'm hoping this one's just as good. I'd be happy to play it. There's no concerns there. So a pretty decent showing from Nintendo. One thing that was missing, and the only reason that it counts is because what's his name, Mochizuki from Bloomberg said that there is a new Switch console in development. Now, when he's saying it, it's pretty much guaranteed at this point. It's a matter of time. He's got such a good track record that it's just a matter of time. Yeah, we heard nothing.
Yeah.
So I wonder what the idea is behind it. Is it the Switch 2? Are they going to do new Nintendo Switch? Rumor has it it's new Nintendo Switch. But for Mochizuki and Bloomberg to run it, it has to be at least real in the sense that it's happening at some point.
Yeah, the excitement for a Switch Pro or Super Switch or whatever was just building and building in the lead up to E3. And you just feel the air completely disappear from the room when it became apparent that we weren't going to get that announcement in the lead up to E3 or at E3.
Yes.
Mind you, like it's still like I definitely consider it's a matter of when, not if, we get an upgrade. Given that's just Nintendo's MO at this point.
I feel like it'll be mid next. I feel like the chip shortages is affecting everyone more than we realize. I mean, we still can't get a PS5 in this country. I feel like the chip shortages will be a thing at least until mid next year. So I feel like their plans might have been to do it for this Christmas, but it's not now. It's next year.
But at least in the meantime, we still have plenty of games that we can play on the Switch, whether it be WarioWare or the new Metroid Dread, or even just something small as the mini arcade game, indie games that will be coming to the eShop.
Absolutely. All right, block 2 of our coverage of E3 is, of course, going into Microsoft, who, outside of Nintendo, probably had the biggest singular showing. It was 90 plus minutes, I want to say. It was pretty standard Microsoft. They never have the worst shows, but they always have at least okay shows. And so, we had all the usuals coming along. We're going to go into detail with some of them, of course, but Don, I mean, we saw a little bit more of Halo. You can see that they took the criticisms about the graphics to heart, and they've gone out of their way to make sure that anything they release now does not look like the shaved monkey from the memes. But I mean, I never cared about the graphics in Halo.
Can I get what's called a skin pack that does have the shaved monkey?
That'll be a meme at some point, I'm sure. They went into the multiplayer, mentioned how multiplayer will be free to play. It'll be a season pass system, which I think is smart.
And even then, they'll have a perpetual season pass one
Yes.
which all the various other games with Season Pass have looked at that and thought, we want that as well. You should
Yes.
check out any other subreddit I've been in.
Yeah. So basically, it's instead of it being something comes up for a little bit, you've got your 3 months to, or you got your months or 2 months to earn it. It stays there ongoing. There might be unique things, but you can still earn them eventually, which I think is really cool. I think that's how it always should have been, and it's less.
Plus, also for a game like Halo, where there's definitely been a cosmetic and fashion parade element, but
Yes.
ultimately you go there because you played Halo multiplayer in your formative years,
Yes.
and you want to recapture some of that magic.
Yeah.
And they seem to have at least taken lessons in trying to harken back to that compared to where they went in terms of multiplayer with Halos 4 and 5.
Yeah, so I mean, 4 at least had co-op, 5 did not have co-op and was rightly ripped over the coals for it. The new one apparently does. I don't care what it looks like as long as I can play 2-person couch co-op. I don't give a stuff. It doesn't fade me. 4-person online, 2-player couch co-op. That is such an important part of the Halo mythos, and for them to miss out on 5 was such a big deal. Going into another game that is an in-house game from Microsoft, it is Forza Horizon 5, this time set in Mexico.
Yes.
The rumors were all Japan, it's going to be Japan, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. No, turns out it's Mexico.
And this is kind of the showcase that that should have come out at launch, because it is because car games are incredibly easy to make look pretty. And don't get me wrong, Forza Horizon 5 looks spectacular.
Yes, and it uses every bit of the Series X. They'll tell you for sure. They did obviously mention that the motorsport game is coming out due for next year.
Yep.
But of course, Horizon has always been there. They're more more arcadey focused.
Yeah. The more casual, happy, fun time.
Yeah, they're doing Test Drive Unlimited properly.
Yeah.
If we're being mean. And that game does look fantastic. Due out this year, I believe.
Yes, October, November, it's the usual holiday release. And from the launch where there were absolutely no games, we are now starting to get more and more games. Like with Forza Horizon 5, there's a promise that Halo Infinite will come out during the holidays. A game that will not be coming out anytime soon, or at least it will be coming out in 2022. Is Starfield.
Yes. So Starfield, of course, I believe, for my money, there were lots of rumors beforehand saying Starfield will be 2021. I never believed them because I feel like Starfield is going to be one of the first main titles that is just Series X or Series specific. It's not available on the One consoles. And I feel like if you do that in 2021, it's a recipe for disaster. Halo has to come out on one console. It has to. As horrible as it sounds, you can't have that flagship and not do that. I feel like Starfield will be the first big exclusive to come thing. They've now officially confirmed that it will not come to PS5. Pete Hines had to go out on the Twitters and apologise.
Yep.
Suck it, Pete.
Having said that, we don't know too much more about the game. We know it's set in space. We know that you cannot climb the ladders, and people have taken the tiny, minute details, and they've speculated either this is what's called foreshadowing, where Elder Scrolls 6 will be set, or that this is set in the Elder Scrolls universe.
So, of course, people can't help themselves. There are some interesting and reasonably solid leaks online about what the game's actually gonna do.
To be honest, I'm just happy if it is just Skyrim in space. Even though fantasy and sci-fi are the exact same thing, don't send me your mail on that one. But
It's 100% true though. Yeah.
yes, but I've always been more of a sci-fi sucker than a fantasy sucker. Not just because there are no in space you don't have giant spiders.
Yeah. Okay. And we know you love more than Solus. We got it.
Yes, also that. But yeah, even if it I'd be very interested to see whether Starfield goes in a more realistic direction, or whether you will be facing off against aliens and you'll get your space giant spiders that way.
I'll fill you in on the rumors after we're done. Another one from I guess technically Bethesda, Redfall. Redfall was announced. It's a 4-person co-op shooter. It's an asymmetric. Every person has their different abilities, which I prefer those kind of co-op shooters, and I always have. Again, considering it's a game where it's obviously trying to do they're all cool young people thing, it didn't great, which is news for me because I've become a boomer in my old age, and there's nothing worse than a trailer if someone just sounds like a gronk and just trying so hard to write for kids. This one just sounded like normal-ish people, you know what I mean? And reminds me a lot of what was that game? Brute Force on the original Xbox, where everyone had their different powers.
That's something that I haven't thought about in a while.
But that's the kind of co-op. I prefer that kind of co-op shooter. I always
the tone
have,
is maybe because it's about vampires, but the tone is Whedon-esque without being overly Whedon-esque.
Correct. Yeah, and
Yeah.
It does, yeah. I watched the trailer. I'm like, yeah, cool. They all sound like they're young people and they're dealing with this world that they're into. But it's not like hashtag YOLO Swaggins kind of
Yeah.
shit. Like it doesn't really go down.
But no, yeah, like it's like the trailer. We only got the cinematic trailer for Redfall, but it does set what's a really promising tone for when the game
Sets a
does come out.
universe,
Yes.
establishes what the game's going to be like, establishes kind of the hierarchies of it and stuff like that.
But
It does a good job as a hype trailer.
Yeah, it's gonna have to set up the hype because we've got a surprising amount of four-player co-op alien/zombie/vampire shooters.
That is quite literally a conversation for another segment, Donald, and you
Yes.
know that. So let's save that one. Let's put a pin in that one for now. A bit of a different route. One thing that I will say that has come up, obviously Metro 2043 and those kind of games were always a very good kind of representations of how Russia would deal with a nuclear blast or a nuclear apocalypse. We've had Fallout, we've had plenty of other games do it in the West. But it's really opened up a lot. Atomic RPG is basically Russian version of old Fallout, but we've had Atomic Heart come out. The trailers come out for it, which is more of a steampunky kind of post-apoc. And then obviously we had Stalker 2 be mentioned as well. But Atomic Heart to me was Stalker's a known quantity. I was like, what am I actually looking at? This looks like great in the sense that it's just trying something visually different.
Yeah, it kind of feels like what's called the Eastern European version of We Happy Few, doesn't
Yes,
it?
it's very much got those vibes for sure.
Yes, and who knows if the game will actually be able to deliver, or because I put this and Stalker 2 in immensely in my head as Eurojank.
Yes.
Games which may not feel as smoothly polished as your Halo Infinite, but my goodness, it's so much more interesting than that.
Correct. And again, this was always the argument with Bethesda and a lot of the bugs, is we will forgive bugs if there's something underlying. And that's why I hated Fallout 4 so much, because I can't forgive the bugs when the story's so bad, right? This has such an interesting premise and interesting concept. I would be interested, finding out what actually happened, why the world is this way. That was part of what made We Happy Few, while it was jank, it was still interesting because it was like, okay, so it's this Orwellian take, this has happened, blah, blah. I get that same vibe. We Happy Few is a very good comparison, Don. I feel like that's a very similar thing to what we're getting from this game in particular. And then obviously Stalker 2 looks really good as well.
And I'm surprised, how much fidelity there is. Considering Stalker 1, admittedly Stalker 1 was kind of a resource pusher back in its original release on PC.
Yeah.
But the quality of the facial animations, the shadows in the Stalker 2 trailer, it left quite a good impression.
The thing that annoyed me about the recent Metro was how they used a lot of American idioms and stuff like that. The trailer was fully in Russian. It was fully in Cyrillic, and I think that's how it should always be. But I'm the guy who subs over dubs anyway. One last one before we go. There was a bit of an indie block, a bunch of indie games littered in between. We had Party Animals finally getting a date, which is 2022. Plague Tale getting a sequel, is fantastic. Replaced is probably one of the prettiest indie games I've seen in a while. That or Trek to Yomi, which is the Devolver game. God, it looked good. If nothing else, God, it looked good.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I'm happy. I'd be happy just to have this as a screensaver. I'm just walking through these ray traced. Would you call it 16-bit style?
I guess style. Yeah, I don't know. Pixel art is it's very broad, but yeah.
Pixel art, as you said, it is a dime a dozen, especially the indie scene. So you have to sort of have something to stand out. This game does that.
Yeah, it looks so fantastic. And yeah, if anything, it's probably one of the very few indie games that made me go, wow, that looks good. I hope it plays good. It seems like it plays all right. It seems like the combat flows from the little bits that we've seen.
Yeah.
But we'll have to actually see what it's like for now. But what are your thoughts on Xbox's showing, or Microsoft showing overall?
As you said, Microsoft has always been pretty consistent in terms of the games that it shows off. You know what you're getting, and you're going to get a good time, and we did. The question, and even then, if a game even just mildly piques your interest, odds are it's going to be on Game Pass at some point.
27 of the 30 games that were announced at Microsoft conference are on Game Pass. So,
yes.
So Game Pass, as always, being the Game Pass shills that we are, make sure you check it out. xCloud is also announced for Australia and the expansion of it as well. So plenty of cool things from the Microsoft conference when it all is said and done. Now, we've covered Nintendo, we've covered Microsoft. They were probably the two biggest and I guess most worthy showings as far as having something to talk about. They went for long enough, they had enough interesting things in them. But there were some interesting things from a lot of the other developers and publishers, and that's what this one is dedicated to. Don, Elden Ring finally got a new trailer. All those people finally got to see.
They've secreted it. They've willed it into the existence by sheer force and wish power.
And it does just look like Dark Souls. I hate to break it to everyone. It looks exactly like it looks like Dark Souls, and I'm sure it will fit
looks
into
like
the
Dark
lore.
Souls, but it isn't sort of bound by Dark Souls tone and lore, so it can sort of throw differently. And even it's not bound by Dark Souls' particular tempo of combat either, is my impression.
Yeah,
too.
I still think it's going to tie in somehow. I just get the feeling, like, even with the George R.R. Martin influence and with all that kind of stuff, I feel like it's still going to tie into Dark Souls somehow. Like, they've got Tainted instead of what do they call them? Like husks or whatever they were called. I can't remember what they were called. I never liked Dark Souls. You know, it just really feels like Dark Souls, which is fine because those players want that game.
And it's a known quantity, and From Software, what's it called? It's their bread and butter. They do that excellently. So
I just wish there was a new Armored Core game coming anytime soon, but that's all right. It's not going to happen. The other one that was unique out of Square Enix actually had a reasonably good showing. If we were going to talk about another one that there wasn't a Devolver doing a meme or limited run doing memes, Stranger in Paradise, Final Fantasy Origins is set in the world of the first Final Fantasy. Like it's like a remake of, like, similar way that Final Fantasy VII was a remake. You know what I mean? Like it's all the characters and stuff from one. Yet, I mean, it looked fine. Like it was a hacky slashy, but
the trailer was sort of the standout thing of E3, not necessarily for its quality.
Because of all the chaos.
Yes.
In the chaos.
Quick poll, a quick quiz. How many times is the word chaos uttered in that 2.5
I
minute
would
trailer?
say like 17.
8.
So there you go, because it just felt
Yeah.
like more. Like
The main character, he really wants to kill chaos, and he wants you to know about it. But otherwise, the demo is, like, as a recording out on PlayStation 5, I've had to go with it, and it is basic because it's a Team Ninja game, and it is basically just Neo with a Final Fantasy skin applied to it, which isn't a bad thing, mind you.
Team Ninja have made more money making games for. It's like Namco Bandai, right? Namco Bandai make more games for other people than they necessarily do for themselves. They make Toei games, and then they make all the Nintendo games, not all, but most of them.
Yeah.
And Koei Tecmo have found a similar niche. Like they make games for Nintendo, they make games for everyone. A lot of their skill is that. And I feel like it's sad because I do love a lot of KT properties, RIP DOA. But at the same time, I'm glad to see them doing well because they've always made a quality game. And there'll be people in our Discord who will disagree with that statement, but they've always made stuff that I've loved. So I'm glad to see them succeeding, I guess.
Yes, and I'm glad to see them succeeding with the Final Fantasy brand as well, because we've definitely seen some stumbles when the Final Fantasy names hand off to other people.
Yes.
It doesn't seem like Stranger of Paradise seems like it'll be an interesting one of those.
Yes.
But speaking of brands, that have been fumbled recently, the Avengers game wasn't great. So it's
To quote my favorite podcast host, co-host, Deus Ex died for this.
But yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy was also unveiled here, and it looks promising that it's not a games as a service game. That's for sure.
It's not a games as a service game. It looks like a pretty reasonable third-person shooter. Obviously, a bit more mobility options than, say, Gears or something like that. Reminds me a lot of Binary Domain, the way you control your people and tell them to do stuff. And some people have particular strengths against particular enemies and that kind of stuff. It looks like there's a bit of a notoriety system, as in, like, if you agree with certain people, you do things to certain people, blah 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 blah. So I don't know, like. It looks better than I thought it does. It's further along in development, obviously, than a lot of others. It comes out in October.
You said that, and I'm still surprised about that.
And like, I don't know, like, we've only seen like what looks like the first level, right? So they've set the premise, they've set the thing. They look like scuffed versions of the movie people, sure, but the voice acting was on point. Like, they were still well voice acted. It was still funny.
The writing feels like it comes out of the Guardians of the Galaxy films.
And they made a point of having one of the guys who's written for Guardians of the Galaxy, who's written for the comics.
Yeah.
And they made a point of, and he made a specific point. This is the reason I got my most, not hopes up, but I have to think. He goes, how we wrote this game is different to how you would write it for the movies and how you would write it for the comics books because it's its own medium. If half of the goddamn industry understood that, we'd all be in a fucking better place. You can't write a comic book that is a game unless you're writing Max Payne. It's as simple as that. And yeah, anyway, look, the next one is All You, and I'm going to
Yes.
let you tell me about it. Inscription.
Inscription, it came from the Devolver Digital stream. It is a card game, but
Donald
it's also
has recommending
but
a
it's
card game.
also a it's also got various other genres it's pulling from. There's escape room elements, there's horror elements, there's apparently some FMV thrown in there somewhere. If you watch this trailer, and it is an incredibly striking trailer. As in, like, everything about the tone and, well, I'll be happily admit it, the cards. What just strikes my attention. I just kind of want to know more of what this game has to offer. And indeed, the Devolver stream was kind of full of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, Devolver always do a striking art style. They always do a way to not only get you visually, but also get like a hook into whatever the game that you're playing might be. So, I mean, I'm always a big fan of Devolver. Trek to Yomi was the one from Devolver that I thought looked particularly good. But again, when you told me this was a card game, like, yeah, it's a Donald. It's a Donald recommendation. Yeah. The last one is more a PSA than it is necessarily a
Because
recommendation.
Limited Run Games also did their own stream. They announced 30 titles that they would be releasing physical versions of, like very much throwing into the archives. One of them they announced was the 3DO, let's say, saucy PowerPoints, Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. Do not buy Plumbers Don't Wear Ties. It is a bad game. Do not buy it ironically. Do not engage with that at all. This is your warning. Do not.
So for all the retro gamers out there who are going to buy 3DO games anyway, just remember that Rise of the Robots suck too. So there's plenty of bad games on the 3DO. But yes, funnily enough, one of the games that I think... Have you played the new Leisure Suit Larry? Jesus, good for a modern Leisure Suit Larry
I'm
game.
surprised. I've looked at the Metacritic scores for that. They are much higher than I would expect them to.
I would guess mid-70s if I was a betting man, and it's way better than...
I expected it to be half that.
Of course, because, yeah, anyway, look, we live in 20...
Yes.
How do you do Leisure Suit Larry in 2021? That's how you do it, apparently. Donald, is there anything else that's worth mentioning from E3 before we wrap up?
Just the fact that there will be, like, even though we are kind of in this weird post-COVID period, there are still plenty of video games on offer, whether it be from the small indie devs or the big AAA studios. So we're not poor for games.
And if you are sick of all the boring stuff that E3 has to hold, make sure you check out Blue Box Games and the interesting stuff going on there. If that's you, Hideo, I love you so much for it. Anyway, on that note, NewGamePlus.tv, don't forget to check us out at NewGamePlus.tv on all the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, all the usual places to find us. If you are watching this on C31, never fear, we will hopefully be back at the end of the year with another season, before the end of the year with another season. And if you're not watching this on C31, well, then bad things happen, and just make sure you watch us on all those other places, like, subscribe, do all the cool kid stuff. We would appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you very soon.